This is the author of the HPV Shell Designer. This tutorial is basically a general overview of what you can do in the Designer, just to give you a feel for the things you might want to do. This design page here is the one that lets you change the shape of the shell. There's also a frame designer, and you get to those by clicking the designer menu and picking out the particular designer you want. In this designer you can change the frame. In this designer you can change the rider. Looking back on the shell designer, on this page, if you click show tug marks, you can see the different places on the screen that you can drag to change the shape of the shell. And what your goal will probably be would be to make the smallest shell you can make and still fit yourself in the frame inside of it. And you can tug on these things by left clicking to select them and holding down your control key and the left mouse key at the same time to drag them around. I'm picking a few out. In this case you can't see what I'm doing much with the shoulder, but you can see that if I don't drag the shoulder big enough I don't fit inside the frame. And what I'm doing now is looking up around this area and this area and this area to see if I'm popping out, and I'm going to push the bottom up to where my feet and part of my thigh is popping out. So I wouldn't want it that small because I wouldn't fit. There's basically two different sets of curves we're dragging. The first curve is the rider box, and this is what it's designed around. This is a hula hoop that goes around the biggest part of your body, and around which the airfoils get bigger as they come from the nose till they get to it, and smaller as they go from there towards the tail section. The other set of curves is the tail curves, as you can see here in this area, and that's defined by these tug marks here. Some of these are hidden behind the wheel, but you can see the ones that are not, and those you would either click here or click the radio buttons up here to select, drag those out as you see fit. Let's go to the frame designer. And in the frame designer, what you do here is you place your frame on here. There's only one requirement for this entire frame designer, and that is the crank. And notice that I click the crank here. It shows that I've selected the crank. Now I'm going to left mouse drag this crank around. I'm going to put it up a little bit closer. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to goof up, but I'm going to do it intentionally. I'm going to the shell. It doesn't look like it's any different here, and the reason was back on the frame designer I have to click the export button. I don't automatically port all those changes up to that shell designer until you're ready. Once you get over here now, you can see that his knees are sort of in his chest because the crank is too close. So what I'm going to do now is, okay, that's really where I want my crank, but obviously that's not where I can sit anymore, so let's go over to my rider designer. And in the rider designer I'm going to pick out a part of the rider, and the only part that is allowed to move the entire rider is the pelvis. So I grab the pelvis here, I'm going to slide it back, and I'm going to go to the shell designer. I don't see any difference, and the reason was back on the rider designer I'm going to click the export button, and back in the shell designer I've gotten farther away. Now it looks like I'm stretching out a little bit far, and I'm looking at this angle up here. I am stretching out a little bit far. That's a bit of a straight knee for an upright, but probably not, based on what the information Warren has forwarded to me, is probably not too stretched out for a recumbent. Back on the frame designer, it looks like I've got my crank a little bit high. I'm going to move my crank down a little bit and export that and go back to the shell designer. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, but I need to move my rider box. I've moved my massive, the biggest part of this thing is my torso. I've moved my massive torso back a little bit too far, so I'm going to click on the rider control box slider. I'm going to slide that thing back just a little bit, and I'm just kind of quickly left clicking the left mouse button here. You can do the slider, but it's a little bit hard to place it doing that, so I'm going to move it back till I think I'm happy, and I'm pretty happy there. And now I'm going to say, well, it looks like I fit in it pretty well. I'm looking for parts of my body to pop out. I don't see that. I'm going to take a look at the shell size. I'm going to do an analysis on it. I have 343 square inches, and I'm holding my left mouse button down while I did this, and you can see I moved the light around as I did that. That's holding the left mouse button and dragging is move the light source. But I have 343 square inches of frontal area, and it looks like this is the biggest part of the shell out here, but see that little blue ring back there? That is the rider box. That is actually the biggest part. The closer part to me is showing up as parallax error. It's a little bit closer, so it looks a little bit too big. So I'm looking at something like this as being the biggest part when really the biggest part was back here. This looks at the true biggest part, gives you the proper analysis on it. I have 114 inches length and 28 inches high and 20.7 inches wide, and I know that those numbers are big enough for me to fit into. A little bit on the tail box. The tail box for your best results will want to have the start of it just behind the rider's bottom tug, and the start of the tail, which should be right behind the rider top. And I'm highlighting that to show you where that is, and you'll get your best results. Once you're happy with your shell, you'll want to click the export button and the create ribs button. That did some stuff in the background, but nothing shows. And then the create PNGs button. And you can see your shell shapes here. I've got a fairly squared off bottom on this thing, although they really are a little bit rounded. They're not very rounded. I also have kind of a pointy fin going back. And this one section here is the nose piece, which, looking back on this, I'm going to show the ribs. That's this piece right here. And it looks like my ribs did not, my nose piece did not honor the first position of my ribs. But anyway, that's obviously a bug I'll need to fix. But anyway, you can see your ribs show up here, and you can also export them. Now what that's done is created some files. Now where do you find those files? I'm opening Windows Explorer here, and the way you do this is click your Start button and right click it and say Open Windows Explorer. And up here I'm going to type in %appdata, %, and I find an HPV design folder, and in that I'm looking at the name of my project file, which is default long wheelbase. So I'm looking for a default long wheelbase output, and here's my bitmaps over here. And you can load these up into your printer and print them out, and be warned that you have to have the proper resolution to get those to come out to be inches. Some of the paint software that you might use to print with will allow you to set pixels per inch, but in case it doesn't, back on the output window you can set that horizontal and vertical dots per inch. Now, this is actually printer software. The screen's typically 96 by 96, but to get new PNGs out, we'll have to recreate the click PNGs. These won't look any different because they're scaled, no matter what you set here. But this will get bigger. You notice this is 700 pixels wide. I'm going to go back and reload that. And now it's 1,000 pixels wide.